The recycled air on Station Karis tasted of copper and ozone, a bitter reminder that the life support systems had been patched one too many times. Vin Carrick shifted in his seat, the servo motors in his left leg, grinding quietly beneath his worn military cargo pants. At 58, half his body was replacement parts. A titanium femur from Proxima raids, synthetic muscle fibers in his right arm from a blast on Kepler Station, an artificial retina that occasionally flickered when the station's power grid hiccuped. He didn't need to be here. His military pension was enough to keep him comfortable in one of the inner rim colonies where the air was clean and the gravity constant. But something about the edge of known space called to him, the same something that had driven him through 27 years of Marine service across the galaxy's forgotten corners. The auction hall stretched before him like a metal cathedral, its vaulted ceiling disappearing into shadow. Holographic displays flickered above rows of containment units, each housing specimens from the galaxy's most remote worlds. The crowd was the usual mix of collectors, researchers, and dealers, all with more credits than conscience, judging by some of the lots being offered. Vin's attention drifted to Lot 247, suspended in a cylindrical containment field near the back. The auctioneer's voice droned on about genetic stability and breeding potential, but Vin barely heard him. 8 small forms huddled together at the bottom of the cylinder, their scales catching the harsh overhead lights. The auction catalog listed them as Draconius minimus rare specimens from the restricted Vegan preserve. Something about the way they moved together, protective and purposeful, made Vin's chest tighten. He'd seen that same behavior before in human children during evacuation procedures. The instinct to shield the vulnerable, to form protective circles when threatened. The bidding started at 50,000 credits. Within minutes, it had climbed to 200,000, then 500. Corporate representatives raised their paddles with mechanical precision, treating the creatures like mineral rights or mining equipment. Vin found himself leaning forward, his hands clenched on the armrests of his chair. The auctioneer's hammer was rising to fall when Vin stood up. His voice roughened by years of commanding troops over battlefield comms carried across the hall. Legal challenge. Lot 247 is unlawfully obtained. A ripple of tension passed through the crowd. The auctioneer, a thin man with implanted data ports gleaming at his temples, paused mid-swing. Sir, all documentation for this lot is in order. Please sit down or security will... Documentation can be forged. Vin pulled out a data crystal from his jacket pocket, its faceted surface catching the light. I have evidence that these are not simple animals. According to Galactic Council Statute 1247A, sentient beings cannot be sold as property. The security guards were already moving, but the head of auction operations, a woman with chrome silver hair and predatory eyes, held up a hand. What evidence? Vin walked down the aisle, his mechanical leg clicking against the metal floor with each step. The crowds parted before him, perhaps recognizing something in his bearing that spoke of battlefields and decisions that couldn't be unmade. He reached the containment cylinder and held up the data crystal. Inside the cylinder, the 8 small dragons, for that's what they clearly were, despite the clinical taxonomy, had arranged themselves in a perfect defensive circle. Their necks were extended, creating an interlocking pattern that reminded Vin of Celtic knots. This contains research data from Dr. Elena Solaris, a xenocultural specialist. She spent 3 years studying the Vegan civilization before the preserve was established. Her findings were suppressed but not destroyed. He slotted the crystal into a nearby data port. Care to explain why you're auctioning off the children of a sentient species? The holographic displays around the cylinder lit up with Solaris's research. Crystalline city spires that caught starlight and turned it into song. Mathematical proofs of complex social structures. Most damning of all recordings of adult Vegan dragons in ritual formation, their combined voices creating harmonies that human ears could barely process. The preserve was established to protect mineral rights, not life forms, the auction house manager said, but her voice lacked conviction. These specimens were legally harvested from nurseries. Vin's voice was flat, military calm. These are children. And according to your own manifest, they still carry traces of their parents' song in their neural pathways. As if responding to his words, the dragons in the cylinder began to hum. It was barely audible, a vibration felt more than heard, but it made every piece of electronic equipment in the hall flicker. The sound built harmonizing in ways that seemed to bypass the ears and speak directly to the nervous system. The crowd began to shift uncomfortably. Some of the corporate bidders were backing away their expressions, shifting from greed to uncertainty. Only Vin moved closer, placing his hand against the containment field. "You can understand us, can't you?" he said softly. The humming intensified, and suddenly every screen in the hall was displaying the same image, a star map, with coordinates highlighted in golden light. The dragon's song rose and fell, weaving through frequencies that made the station's hull ring like a bell. The auction house manager was shouting orders now, but her security guards were hesitating. Whatever the dragons were doing, it was affecting the station systems. Environmental controls fluctuated. Gravity plates stuttered. Emergency lights began flashing in sequences that matched the rhythm of the creature's song. Vin stepped back as the containment field destabilized. The cylinder's magnetic lock disengaged with a soft hiss, and the glass slid upward into the ceiling. The dragons didn't flee. Instead, they climbed to the rim of their former prison and fixed their large, ancient eyes on Vin. "Sir," the auction manager said, her voice tight with controlled panic, "you need to stay back. These creatures could be dangerous." Vin looked at the small beings before him. The largest was no bigger than a house cat with scales that shifted from deep blue to silver in the changing light. Its eyes held an intelligence that reminded him uncomfortably of his own reflection, old, beyond its years marked by loss and the weight of survival. "They're not dangerous," he said. "They're refugees." The dragon tilted its head, studying him with one large eye. Then it opened its mouth and sang a single pure note. The sound seemed to contain multitudes' grief and hope, memory and longing, all wrapped in harmonics that made Vin's replacement parts vibrate in sympathy. Without conscious thought, he held out his hand. The dragon considered for a moment, then stepped delicately onto his palm. Its claws gripped gently, careful not to pierce his synthetic skin. One by one, the others followed until Vin stood in the center of the auction hall, with 8 baby dragons clinging to his arms and shoulders. "I invoke cultural preservation rights," Vin announced, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had once commanded star destroyers. As a certified cultural preservation specialist, he tapped the military certification badge on his jacket. "I'm claiming custody of these beings under emergency protection protocols." The auction manager's face was pale. "You can't just the buyers the contracts?" "The contracts are void if the merchandise doesn't exist." Vin gestured toward the door. "I'm walking out of here with them. Anyone who wants to stop me is welcome to try." Nobody moved. The dragon's song had grown softer, but more complex, weaving through the hall's speaker system and spreading throughout the station. Vin could hear answering echoes coming from the walls themselves, as if the metal hull were singing back. He walked slowly toward the exit, acutely aware of hundreds of eyes following his progress. The dragons rode on his shoulders and arms like tiny guardians, their heads turning to track potential threats. Their trust, complete and inexplicable, made something tight in his chest begin to loosen. The corridor outside the auction hall was chaos. Station security was trying to understand why half their systems were experiencing harmonic interference. Other residents peered out of doorways, drawn by the music that seemed to be coming from the walls themselves. Vin's quarters were in the station's cheapest residential section, where the gravity was too light, and the air recyclers worked overtime to mask the smell of industrial lubricants. He had chosen the location precisely because nobody bothered to look too hard at who came and went in the lower decks. The dragons explored his small apartment with scientific curiosity, examining his few possessions with delicate touches of wingtips and tails. The largest one, Vin had started thinking of it as the leader, perched on the back of his reading chair, and began to produce a low, thrumming call. The others responded immediately, moving into positions around the room that created perfect acoustic resonance. Their combined song filled the space with rich harmonies that made Vin's bones ache with almost remembered music. He sat down heavily, suddenly aware of how tired he was. The dragons continued their song, but softer now, weaving melodies that spoke of safety and gratitude. As they sang, holographic displays began forming in the air above them, not technological projections, but something created by the interaction of their voices with the quantum field itself. The images showed star charts, similar to what had appeared in the auction hall, but far more detailed. Solar systems and trade routes, marked with symbols that seemed to shift and change as Vin watched. At the center of it all was a small moon, orbiting a gas giant, its surface covered with structures that looked grown rather than built. "You're trying to tell me something," Vin said aloud. "Something about where you come from." The leader dragon chirped once, a sound like crystal bells. The hologram zoomed in on the moon, revealing spires that twisted toward the sky in impossible spirals, their surfaces reflecting light in patterns that hurt to look at directly. A soft chime from his door announced a visitor. Vin's body tensed, old military reflexes kicking in. The dragons fell silent instantly, arranging themselves in their defensive circle around his chair. "Mr. Carrick." The voice through the comm was unfamiliar, professionally pleasant. "My name is Marcus Webb. I represent the Biological Resources Corporation. We'd like to speak with you about the specimens you acquired today." Vin remained silent. Through his apartment's small window, he could see station security vessels moving in patterns around the docking bays. Not coincidence then. "We're prepared to offer significant compensation for your cooperation," Webb continued. "These creatures represent years of research potential. Surely you can understand the scientific value." "What I understand," Vin said, raising his voice just enough to be heard through the door, "is that you're talking about living beings like their lab equipment." A pause. Then, "Perhaps we could discuss this in person. I think you'll find our offer quite generous." The dragons had begun humming again, so low it was almost subsonic. The sound made the walls vibrate, and Vin noticed that his apartment's few electronic systems were responding in odd ways. The environmental controls flickered between settings, and his datapad showed cascading streams of numbers that definitely weren't there before. "Not interested," Vin called out. "I suggest you leave before these specimens decide they don't like your tone." Another pause, longer this time. When Webb spoke again, the professional pleasantness had evaporated. "Sir, you may have legal custody for now, but these creatures are extremely valuable research subjects. The Biological Resources Corporation has significant influence in this sector. It would be unfortunate if your residence permit were to be reviewed and found lacking." Vin stood up, his mechanical joints whining softly in the low gravity. The dragon on his chair spread its wings, small but perfectly formed with membrane that caught the light like captured starlight. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm simply explaining the reality of the situation. These creatures belong with qualified researchers who can properly care for them and unlock their scientific potential. Keeping them here in these conditions could be considered a form of neglect." The dragon's humming intensified. Through his apartment's thin walls, Vin could hear other residents complaining about sonic interference. But there was something else beneath the sound, a subharmonic that was definitely not natural. His datapad chimed. Then again. Then the screen lit up with an incoming transmission that definitely wasn't from station communications. The header read, "Emergency broadcast. Cultural preservation protocol activated." "What the hell?" Webb's voice carried clearly through the door, no longer trying to maintain professional composure. Vin looked at his datapad in amazement. The dragon's song had somehow interfaced with the station's communication array, broadcasting their harmonies across subspace channels. And those harmonies were carrying data. The transmission was assembling itself in real time, building a complex document that contained everything Solaris's research genetic analysis, proving the dragon's sentience, historical records of the Vegan civilization trade agreements that had been violated when the preserve was raided. all of it wrapped in the dragon's music, impossible to ignore or delete. "You little beauties," Vin whispered. "You've been planning this." The lead dragon fixed him with one bright eye and made a sound that in a human would have been laughter. Through the door, Vin could hear Webb talking rapidly into his communicator, his voice tight with panic. "Need immediate containment broadcasting on all frequencies, yes, sir. The entire Galactic Council is receiving this." The dragon's song reached a crescendo, and every screen on the station lit up simultaneously. The holographic displays they had created in Vin's apartment were now being replicated station-wide, showing the preserved cities of the Vegan homeworld, the complex mathematical beauty of their cultural achievements, the star charts that marked their scattered refugee populations across the galaxy. And at the center of it all, a simple message in a dozen languages. "We are the children of songs. We remember what was taken. We ask for what is ours by right, life, liberty, and the chance to sing our history to the stars." Vin's door chimed again, but this time it was a station security override. The portal slid open to reveal not just Webb and his corporate security team, but a full squad of station police. Behind them, Administrator Hassan himself, a man who usually didn't leave the executive levels for anything short of catastrophic hull breaches. "Mr. Carrick," Hassan said, pushing past Webb to enter the apartment. "What exactly is happening here?" The dragons had fallen silent, but their message was still broadcasting. Through his window, Vin could see ships in the distance, more arriving every minute as the subspace transmission reached nearby systems. "I think," Vin said carefully, "that depends on what you're going to do about it." Hassan looked around the apartment, taking in the 8 small dragons arranged in their protective formation. His expression was hard to read, but Vin recognized the look of a man forced to make decisions above his pay grade. "The Galactic Council has issued an emergency protective order," Hassan said finally. "These beings are now under Council jurisdiction, pending a full investigation into the legality of their procurement." Webb stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. "Administrator, the Biological Resources Corporation has significant investments in this station. We have agreements, which are suspended pending the investigation." Hassan cut him off. "I've just received word that 3 council ships are en route. Until they arrive, these creatures remain under Mr. Carrick's protection." The dragons began to sing again, but softly this time, a lullaby that seemed to carry notes of victory mixed with ancient sadness. Vin found himself smiling despite everything. "How long until the council ships arrive?" he asked. 36 hours, Hassan replied. "I trust you can manage until then." Vin looked down at the small beings who had somehow orchestrated their own rescue. "I think we'll be fine." After the officials left, Vin settled back into his chair. The dragons had resumed their holographic displays, but now they were showing him something different. The star charts focused on a specific sector, highlighting trade routes and energy signatures that he didn't recognize. "You want me to take you somewhere," he said. It wasn't a question. The lead dragon flew to his shoulder, its tiny claws gripping gently. It sang a single complex phrase that conveyed urgency, hope, and something that felt almost like instructions. Vin pulled up his personal ship registry on his datapad. The Anguish was docked 3 levels down a modified courier ship that had served him well in the years since retirement. She wasn't much to look at, but she was fast and had all the necessary deep space modifications for extended travel. "You're asking a lot," he told the dragon. "I'm not exactly young anymore, and wherever you want to go, it's probably not on any official charts." The dragon's response was another snatch of song, this one containing harmonics that spoke of time running out of something waiting to be found before it was lost forever. Vin sighed and began entering flight plan parameters into his datapad. "Well, I suppose I've made worse decisions. At least this time I know who I'm taking orders from." Over the next 30 hours, preparation became a delicate dance. The dragons seemed to understand the urgency of their situation. They helped in ways that should have been impossible for creatures their size, interfacing with his ship's systems, optimizing power distribution curves, even helping to pack supplies by carrying items 10 times their own weight. More disturbing were the visitors. Corporate representatives appeared at regular intervals each, with increasingly attractive offers for the Dragon's release. Government officials hinted at tax incentives and citizenship upgrades. Even researchers from legitimate institutions came calling promising humane study conditions and shared credit for any discoveries. Vin turned them all away, but he noticed that the Dragons listened to each conversation with intense attention. They seemed to be cataloging every word, every promise and threat, adding it all to some vast mental database. On the morning of the second day, as Vin was running final systems checks on the Anguish, the Dragons began a new song. This one was different from the others, more urgent, almost martial in its rhythm. Within minutes, every alert system on the station was sounding. Vin looked out the docking bay window to see 3 massive ships approaching Kara Station. They bore the Galactic Council seal, their hulls bristling with diplomatic arrays and enough firepower to turn a small moon into debris. "Well," he said to the Dragon perched on his control console, "looks like your council friends are early." The Dragon chirped once, then launched itself into an intricate aerial dance with its 7 companions. Their combined song filled the docking bay, echoing off the metal walls and creating harmonies that made the station's hull sing in response. The council ships were signaling for docking permission, but the station's communication system was completely overwhelmed by harmonic interference. Every screen showed the same message repeated in the flowing script of the Vegan language and translated into a dozen others. The children returned to the song of their ancestors. Let none follow who would silence the music of memory. Vin's pilot training took over. His hands moved across the Anguish's controls with automatic precision, running through the pre-flight sequence as the docking bay's atmosphere was evacuated. The Dragons arranged themselves in their makeshift harnesses, cleverly designed nets that let them move freely while keeping them secure during acceleration. The bay doors opened, revealing the starfield beyond. In the distance, the council ships were trying to establish communication with the station, but their signals were being drowned out by the Dragon's broadcasting song. Vin fired the Anguish's thrusters and slipped out of the docking bay like smoke. The station's traffic control was in chaos, their systems still overloaded by the Dragon's sonic interference. By the time anyone thought to track his departure, he was already beyond the effective range of intercept craft. The Dragon's song changed as they entered open space, becoming something that seemed to harmonize with the cosmic background radiation itself. The holographic star charts appeared again, but now they included real-time navigational data. The Anguish's computers were interpreting the Dragon's music as course corrections, plotting a route through unexplored space with impossible precision. "You're little computer viruses, aren't you?" Vin said with admiration. "Biological quantum processors. No wonder your people were so far advanced." The lead Dragon made a sound that might have been agreement or perhaps amusement. Either way, it was good enough for Vin. The journey took 11 days through space that wasn't on any official charts. The Dragons guided them past nebulae that would have torn the ship apart through gravitational anomalies that bent space-time into pretzels and around the patrol routes of organizations that definitely didn't want to be found. Vin learned to trust their navigation completely. The Anguish flew like it had been designed for this route, every course correction perfectly timed, every jump calculated to the microsecond. It was like flying in formation with his old squadron, following a lead pilot who knew the terrain better than anyone had a right to. On the 7th day, they entered a system that wasn't listed in any database. A lone gas giant, hung in space, attended by 7 moons. The Dragon's song intensified as they approached the 3rd moon, their harmonies taking on notes of homecoming and anticipation. The moon's surface was covered with structures that defied easy categorization. They looked like a cross between architecture and living coral spiraling towers that twisted toward the sky in patterns that seemed to shift when viewed directly. From orbit, the entire surface looked like a vast musical instrument designed to catch and amplify the songs of the wind. "My God," Vin whispered, This is it, isn't it? This is what's left of your people." The dragons were practically vibrating with excitement, their songs weaving together in complex harmonies that made the Anguish's hull ring like a bell. Landing coordinates appeared on his navigation screen, guiding him toward a flat area between two spiraling towers. As they descended, Vin could see that the structures weren't abandoned. Light moved through them in patterns that matched the dragon's songs, and he could swear he saw larger shapes moving in the shadows between the spires. The landing was gentle, guided by some kind of tractor field that caught the ship and eased it down onto a pad that seemed to have been grown specifically for that purpose. As the Anguish's engines spun down, Vin could hear answering songs from the structures around them. Deep, resonant calls that spoke of ages beyond counting of knowledge, preserved through the darkest times of children finally coming home. Vin opened the cargo bay doors and watched as the 8 baby dragons flew out to join the songs that welcomed them. They moved in a perfect formation, their small voices adding new harmonies to the ancient music that filled the air. He followed them out onto the surface, his mechanical leg adjusting automatically to the lighter gravity. The atmosphere was breathable sweet, with the scent of something like jasmine mixed with ozone. Before him, the spires rose into the pale blue sky, their surfaces rippling with patterns of light that flowed like liquid music. From the largest structure, a figure emerged, or rather flowed out, as if it were part of the building itself. An adult, vegan dragon, easily the size of an Earth aircraft, its scales shifting through colors that had no human names. Ancient eyes regarded Vin with a mixture of curiosity and something that might have been gratitude. The great dragon began to sing, and suddenly Vin could understand. Not the words there were no words, but the meaning that flowed beneath the music. Welcome, recognition, a place prepared for those who had protected the song. More dragons emerged from the spires, adults and juveniles of every size, all adding their voices to the growing symphony. The 8 babies flew among them, their own songs telling the story of their rescue, their journey, and the strange human who had risked everything to bring them home. Vin found himself crying tears he hadn't shed since the war, flowing freely down his weathered cheeks. For the first time in years, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The great dragon approached him, moving with liquid grace across the crystalline ground. Up close, Vin could see that its scales weren't just colored, they held images, memories preserved in living crystal. Battles, and birth cities rising and falling, the long history of a people who had learned to store their culture in song itself. It lowered its massive head until they were eye to eye, and Vin found himself looking into depths that contained eons of knowledge. The dragon opened its mouth and sang a single pure note. Understanding flooded through him. Not telepathy, but something deeper, a sharing of purpose that transcended species barriers. He saw what the dragons needed, what his role would be in the preservation of their culture. Protector, yes, but also student, chronicler, bridge between worlds. The dragons had survived by adapting, by learning to hide their knowledge in forms that seemed harmless to those who would exploit them. The babies he had saved were more than just children. They were living libraries, carriers of genetic memories that held 10,000 years of accumulated wisdom. And now, they needed someone who understood both worlds, someone who could help them navigate the complex politics of interstellar civilization while preserving the purity of their ancient songs. Vin looked around at the impossible architecture, at the dragons, young and old, who watched him with patient eyes, at the spires that turned starlight into music. He thought of his empty apartment on Station Karis, of the endless cycle of shore leave and lonely retirement that had been his life since the war. "I accept," he said aloud, though he wasn't sure anyone needed to hear the words. The dragon's response was a harmony that seemed to come from the moon itself, a celebration that made the very ground vibrate with joy. The 8 babies he had rescued flew in complex patterns overhead, their songs weaving with those of their elders, to create music that was both ancient and newly born. As the twin suns of the system set behind the gas giant, casting the moon in shades of gold and azure, Vin Carrick finally understood what his life had been leading toward. Not an ending, but a transformation. Not retirement, but the beginning of the most important duty he had ever undertaken. The dragons sang through the night, their voices carrying across the crystalline landscape and out into space itself. And for the first time since the war ended, Vin Carrick sang with them, his rough human voice, adding its own imperfect harmony to the eternal song of memory and hope. In the days that followed, as he began to learn the true extent of the dragon's knowledge and the magnitude of what had been lost when their worlds were integrated into galactic civilization, Vin knew he had found his purpose. The young Marine who had once fought to protect human colonies among the stars had become something he never could have imagined: guardian of an alien culture, protector of living music, keeper of songs that held the memories of 1,000 worlds. It wasn't the retirement he had planned for, but as he looked out at the spires that sang with the wind and felt the gentle weight of a baby dragon settling on his shoulder, Vin Carrick couldn't imagine wanting to be anywhere else. The music of the Vegan dragons rose and fell around him, complex harmonies that spoke of loss and renewal, of children saved and cultures preserved, of the long journey from darkness back into the light. And somewhere in that eternal song, Vin heard a new melody being born, the story of a tired soldier who had learned to fight for something more precious than territory or ideology. He had learned to fight for the right of all beings to sing their own songs, to remember their own histories, to pass their cultures down to their children, unchanged by the grinding gears of galactic commerce. As the stars turned overhead and the great dragon cities hummed with ancient life, Vin Carrick finally understood what peace meant. Not the absence of war, but the presence of something worth preserving. Not the silence of death, but the eternal music of life itself, played in harmonies that would ring through the cosmos long after his own voice had fallen silent. The dragons sang, and he sang with them, adding his human notes to their alien symphony. And in that music, past and future became one loss, transformed into hope, and 8 baby dragons, who had once fought for their lives, became the bridge between the human and Vegan peoples, their rescue, the first note in a new song that would echo through the galaxy for generations to come.